All right, let's pivot into visible light now. First thing in the morning, we'll go right through the day. When and what is the ideal exposure and why?
We're talking about visible light now, and because we're talking about visible light, we're talking about light's interaction with photoreceptors in the back of your eye. Now, these receptors are called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. So if we ever use that term, you'll know what they're talking about. These are not the rods and the cones that let you see specifically. These are general like light sensors, kind of like very similar to the sensor that you might have on an outdoor light that you have it set to come on when the sun goes down. That's the type of light sensor that we're talking about. So is there light? Is there not light? And that sort of thing. Now, these sensors tend to be on the lower portion of your retina. And as a result of that, they're more stimulated by light in the upper visual aspect of your visual system. And that's simply because the image gets flipped. So if you have an image in the upper portion, like the sun, where the sun is, where the sky is, that is going to project to the lower portion of your retina, which is where these retinal ganglion cells are. Now, these retinal ganglion cells have two projections. One projects to the timekeeper of your brain and of your body called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And the other projection is to an area called the perihabenular nucleus in the brain. And this is where mood is regulated. So the two major consequences of getting outside and getting light into your eyes is not only getting your circadian rhythm all matched up, but also getting the appropriate mood. Now, this is really important to understand because this affects so many things in your body. So let's talk first about the circadian rhythm. Getting outside into bright light is going to keep your circadian rhythm on a clock and making sure that your schedule is on time. So many studies have shown that when people's sleep schedules change or they're not grounded at the particular time of the day, that's what increases cardiovascular risk. That's what increases cancer risk. And the reason for that is because you're not coordinating the different aspects of your body all at the same time. Think about the Disneyland thing again, right? If you've got the engineers out there shutting down the ride, but you don't have the other people to inspect the ride, if they're not coming in at the same time, you're not going to get the full benefit of that team showing up to look at those, to look at Space Mountain, for instance. If you're not getting the guy who washes the street at the same time as the guy who scrapes the gum off the ground, and if they're not coming at the same time because they're not coordinated, you're not going to get the maximum benefit of those two groups of things that are probably regulated by different genes coming on at the same time. So what in fact you get is you get a half job getting done when your clock is not in sync. And so as a result of that, it's not too hard to understand why cancer rates would go up, cardiovascular rates are going up. The reason is because to keep your cardiovascular disease rates low, to keep your cancer rates low, multiple systems in your body need to be working in concert with each other to do the job correctly. And when the clock is not being set appropriately, those things are not being coordinated, and so you're not going to get the same kind of job. So one of the things that really entrains your clock to make sure that it's on time and everything's running on at the same time is bright light in the morning. And I would say before 9 o'clock. How do you get that bright light? You need to go outside. I can't say this enough. If you think that you're getting light enough inside your home, let me disabuse you of that understanding, because if you were to measure the amount of light in a typical room inside your home in the morning, you would hit maybe about 100 lux. A lux is how we measure the intensity of light. At the same time, if you were to go outside, it would be, if the sun was shining, it could be up to 100,000 lux. So you're getting 1,000 times more light outside than you're getting inside. And because of that, the dose needed is going to come 1,000 times faster outside than it would be if you're inside. Anybody who is in photography would understand this. If you set up a manual SLR camera inside to take a photograph, and you set the f-stop and the ISO and the aperture rating, all those things just for the perfect picture, and then take that camera, don't change anything, and go outside and try to take a picture, it's just going to be a big white blob. It's just going to be a white picture. And the reason is because there's so much more light outside than there is inside. The reason why it doesn't seem that way to us is because when we go outside, our pupils, because of our iris, get so much smaller, and they let in so much less light, so we can adjust to it. You know this, right? When you're outside for a while and you come inside, everything looks dark, and you have to let your eyes kind of open up and allow that light to come in. There's a huge difference between the light inside and outside, that if you want to get the benefits of all of your systems coming on online, okay? Again, think about it like you're flying and you have a connecting flight. If those time schedules are all off, you're going to miss your flight, and you're not going to get the appropriate thing done. It's the same thing in your body. All of these systems need to be come on. They need to be regulated. Your clock needs to be synchronized, and the thing that synchronizes your clock is bright light in the morning before 9 o'clock. I would say 10 to 15 minutes is probably enough. It's probably more than enough. Here's the problem. This time of year in Ontario, you are getting up before the sun is getting up. Yeah, I mean, the sun may not even get up till, I don't know, what is it, 8? What is it over there?
I would say, yeah, around 8 o'clock.
Yeah, that's really hard to do, especially in the wintertime. And this is the reason why people, this is part of the reason why people in the wintertime are more susceptible to diseases. It's the reason why we see the highest levels of mortality across the board. It's also because of the lack of sunlight. So what we found, and it's the main reason, the point being here, it's the main reason why we see people with seasonal affective disorder. So this is the other pathway, not just it projecting to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the time clock of the brain, but it's also projecting to the perihabenular nucleus, which regulates mood. And typically it's women, but also men in the wintertime, January, February, this is where they're depressed, they're not getting enough light. And here's the typical thing that happens. And I know this is in Toronto. I know this because I grew up in Toronto and I visited several times. You can literally, in the wintertime, you know this better than I do, but for those that are listening, you can literally go in your apartment in North York. You can go down to the basement level of your apartment. You can get a path that leads directly, without even going outside, to the train, to the subway station, take the subway station down to the closest terminal downtown, get on the path and walk through basically, miles and miles of mall-like underground, come to where your high-rise office is, and then take an elevator up and stay in your office. You can literally do this every single day and never go outside. It's an amazing infrastructure that you guys have in Toronto. I don't know of many other cities that have that. It's quite a testament to the engineering that you've got there, and the fact that you don't have earthquakes, which is really, you just had an earthquake, which is about a 4, but that's another topic. Here's the point, is that you're not getting exposed to light at all. For those of us in California, it's not much different. We don't have that underground infrastructure, but it's not a dissimilar story. You get up in the morning, you got to get in for a 7 o'clock shift. You go to your garage where your car is parked. You drive in the dark to your underground parking structure, and you go into your building, and then the sun comes up. And then you're working there till 5. The sun's already down, and you're driving home. Again, no benefit of seeing any kind of light. So that type of day in, day out for weeks in the wintertime is going to wreak havoc on your circadian rhythm, not even to mention the fact that you're going home and as late at night, it's dark, it's supposed to be dark, but you're watching screens, you have the TV on, you're socializing. It's just a disaster. So here's what we know works for that type of thing, okay? We know this works. Buying what they call an SAD light or a SAD light, it's about 10,000 lux. You turn it on and you sit in front of it for about 20 minutes, because what you really need is about 3,000 lux hours. So think about that. 10,000 lux for 20 minutes, which is a third of an hour, right? So 10,000 times a third is about 3,333 lux hours, okay? Remember that number. This is about 11 to 16 inches in front of your face. When people do that, they are simulating the visible portion of the sunlight, and they're getting the benefits as if they were looking at the sun when the sun is not up. So it helps with circadian rhythm. It helps with mood. We have studies on that. You can go to Amazon and buy these SAD lamps, 10,000 lux, sit in front of it for 20 minutes. Now, imagine, Jesse, if you go outside and you're going out into the sunlight and it's 100,000 lux. If you just need 3,000 lux hours and this thing is 100,000 lux, you need a 30th of an hour. What's a 30th of an hour? It's literally 2 minutes. 2 minutes outside in the bright sunlight, not looking at the sun, looking directly below it or somewhere on the horizon below it, because remember, your intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells are in the lower portion of the retina. So you want this light to be up in the superior visual fields. That comes in, you literally only need to be outside in bright sun for 2 minutes to get the same benefit that you sitting in front of a 10,000 lux lamp, you need to be there for 20 minutes. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. So it sounds like in my position, the only thing in the winter to do is get one of these lamps.
Yeah, I think it would have helped tremendously. Not only do we see that it reduces the depression, but there's also some evidence, that if you were to put something called a dawn simulation lamp. Have you heard of a dawn simulation lamp?
No.
Okay, so these are lamps that you can buy. You put them in your room and you set them to come on at a certain time of day and in the morning, so like 5, 6 o'clock, as if it's simulating the sunrise. And what it does is it glows brighter and brighter and brighter as you're asleep, as your eyes are closed. This light will then simulate you as if you were sleeping outside. And it's been actually shown to improve cognition, to improve the quality of sleep, and a whole bunch of other endpoints in terms of health. That this is actually what I have in our bedroom.
I have actually heard, now that you explain.
Yeah.
If you're doing that, just to be clear, I assume you'd still want to use the SAD light afterwards.
I would definitely recommend the SAD light if you feel like you have, or you've been diagnosed with seasonal affective disorder. Absolutely. I believe that it probably has other health benefits. And here's the other health benefit. We talked about the clock. So I want to talk about cortisol a little bit, and I want to make sure that I explain this well. Prior to you getting up and getting outside and doing stuff, your body needs a chemical called cortisol. Cortisol is also a steroid hormone. It would actually look very similar to vitamin D, okay, because it actually has very similar effects on transcription in the nucleus. And then there's another hormone at the end of the day, which we're familiar with, called melatonin. Okay, melatonin is a hormone that is also secreted from the pineal gland of the brain, and it comes on right before sleep. So here's this dichotomy that I want you to be very, very cognizant of. Cortisol needs to spike before you get up and go, and basically as you're getting up in the morning and you're ready to do work. Okay, it's getting the body ready to do work. And melatonin is the spike that happens right before you go in for bed. And what you really want to have is high amplitudes of a spike. So here's the thing that we notice that happens at the beginning of the day with cortisol. When you get up, if you stay in a very dark environment and don't get outside, you will have a slight increase in cortisol. But because the amount of cortisol is tightly regulated, you still need to have the same amount of cortisol. It's just going to happen over a much longer period of time. So instead of a very sharp peak that goes up very high, sharply comes back down, and you get all of your required amount of cortisol at one time, and then it stays low for the rest of the day, which is the ideal. What happens is you get this slow, lethargic, anemic growth in cortisol, but it has to stay high because it needs to give you the dose that you need for that day. And so it continues on and actually may even interfere with melatonin production later on that night when you're trying to go to bed. So here's the issue that many people have, Jesse. They say, I can't sleep. I can't fall asleep. And by the way, this long lethargic rise, lipidemic rise of cortisol that occurs gives you the right dose, but it's this chronic elevation of cortisol that can lead to so many metabolic problems. What you want to have, what everybody should have if they want to have good sleep at night, is a very high peaking cortisol where all of the cortisol that you need for the day is given right at the beginning. It comes down and it stays quiet for the rest of the day. That is the optimal amount of cortisol that you should get. There is one thing that will do that better than anything else, Jesse, and that is exposure to bright light in the morning.
I want to make sure we cover sunglasses because we've talked about different benefits in the morning, specifically getting visible light in the eyes. Just like we talked about sunblock before, we could think of glasses as a sunblock for the eyes.
Yeah.
Obviously, something we want to be aware of if we're trying to get this light in our eyes in the morning.
Yeah, so it's a little tricky. If you've got reading glasses, no problem. The benefits of, oh, sorry, not reading glasses, just regular glasses to be able to see. Yeah, I would not recommend taking those off if you're walking around outside. We want people to be able to see. So contacts, I would also put into that category. However, if you're putting on sunglasses for that purpose, realize that you're diminishing the very reason why I was recommending that you go outside in the first place. And that's because the amount of light outside is so much brighter. Why would you want to diminish that with a tinted glass that's going to diminish that or change the spectrum that I believe was perfectly designed for the effects that it gets when you go outside? So I would not recommend sunglasses. Now, I say that with the proviso that there are many people that have eye problems, have retina problems. They're being followed by retina specialists or ophthalmologists. And if they've got a recommendation because they have a particular medical problem to wear those glasses, then I certainly don't want to interfere with that recommendation from their specialist. But in people who don't have issues with their eyes, if you want to get the benefit of circadian rhythm, the benefit of mood, you really want to go outside and not really have anything in between the sun and your eyes. Again, not recommending that you look directly at the sun. I think that's something that we can all agree that we shouldn't do. In fact, if anything, you want to look well below the sun to allow that light to get into the inferior retina at the back of your eye. So definitely recommend that.
What do you think about these more mild blue light blockers? They're yellow or a slight tint. People are wearing them when they're on their computers during the day. Any value there?
I haven't seen data. I know that there's been some data looking at night shift. They call the night shift where they switch the hue of the screen. And from my understanding and the data that I've seen on that, and correct me if there's a new study, it really didn't have the effect that they were looking for.
How do you feel about red light panels? You brought up red light before. And we can also expand out to lasers using light as a therapeutic tool.
That's a discussion I think that's going to be better had once we talk about infrared light. And there's some exciting work that is now going into exactly how does infrared and red, which are both long wavelength energies, how are they actually affecting the mitochondria? And what is actually going on there? There's new data coming out, and actually I've collaborated with Glenn Jeffrey, Bob Fosbury, and Scott Zimmerman, who have published on this before, and we should have a paper coming out very shortly. But the short answer to your question is I think the data is showing that monochromatic light. What do I mean by monochromatic light? I'm talking about lasers. I'm talking about LED lights, are not as effective at doing the job that we want them to do as is diverse multi-wavelength type of light that we would see either from an incandescent bulb or from the sun itself.
Okay. We'll come back to that in a little bit then. I want to stick where we're at for now. People that are indoors trying to get good light, whether it be on the skin or into the eyes, but they're doing it through windows. Is there any benefit there?
It depends on the window. So there's always going to be some degrading of the wavelength. Again, we already talked about ultraviolet light. Really cannot penetrate through any kind of window very well. It's going to be eliminated because, I mean, there are certain materials. We actually talked to someone who found a material that has a lot of transparency to ultraviolet light because they're interested in getting that benefit. But for the most part, the commercial types of window materials that we have in homes tends to block ultraviolet light. Now, variably, it can block infrared light, and we'll talk about the benefits of that, but you really want to get outside and not behind a glass.
You quickly touched on incandescent light. Let's talk about lighting throughout a home. Given where modern technology is, the LED lights are being pushed upon us. What do you do for yourself?
I think the addition of an incandescent bulb in a room full of LEDs is actually beneficial. We actually have some data on that. Glenn Jeffrey just published a paper in Nature Scientific Reports showing that visual discrimination of color, which was an endpoint of mitochondrial function in the retina, was improved over 20% with the simple addition of a 60-watt incandescent light bulb in an LED environment. I think that's a tremendous, and by the way, that's one of the reasons why, that data is one of the reasons why I believe that incandescent bulbs are better than just narrow band LED red light or infrared light therapy, because Glenn Jeffrey repeated the work that he did on LEDs in that type of an environment and only noticed in some bands about 15 to 16% improvement. When he used incandescent, there was a global improvement of more than 20%. So we're seeing much better results, much more robust results with a broad spectrum, a broad biological swath of infrared frequencies versus just one particular color of red light.
One challenge is that these are being banned and they're harder and harder to find.
Yeah.
Due to their energy demand.
Yeah.
Do you see a day where we won't be able to get them?
Well, I think the days are here, and it's getting worse. In fact, in the United States, for instance, in 2028, there's a new rule that's coming out of the Department of Energy that's going to raise the requirement on these. So just to give you a little bit of a background, the way that we measure light coming from a bulb is something called the lumen. The lumen is very highly dependent on the green-yellow aspect wavelengths of the light, which is right in the middle of the visible spectrum, okay? So it's very concentrated in the middle of the visible spectrum. What that means is that if your bulb that you're manufacturing is using energy to produce anything outside of that very narrow spectrum, it's going to basically drop the efficiency of your bulb. So before we had any efficiencies, for instance, an incandescent bulb, that was about 15 lumens per watt. So in other words, for every watt of energy, every watt of power, I should say, that you're consuming, you should be producing about 15 lumens when you're talking about an incandescent bulb. A lot of energy is, quote, wasted outside of the lumen area. So, red, purple, infrared, that sort of thing. So back in, I think it was 2022, this law finally came in and they started making standards. They raised that to 45. So it went from 15 to 45. And what that essentially did, well, actually there was no standard before. It's just that incandescent bulbs were 15. So they came in with the standard that said, okay, the standard is now, boom, 45. Effectively, all general service lamps that had anything less than 45 lumens per watt are now outlawed. You can't sell them unless they are for specialty items. For instance, they don't create an LED bulb for your microwave because it would just fry the components in your LED bulb, right? So you have to have an incandescent bulb there. There's also specialty lamps that require specific bulbs. Those are going to be incandescent bulbs. But we're talking about for your general lamps that you put in your homes, screw-in bulbs in your ceilings, all of those things. And some states have really even taken this off even higher, right? So like in California, you cannot build a home and have permitting unless on the plans it's written to put in an LED socket. And this is not a screw-in, right? So they don't say, there's no more screw-ins. You've got to have an LED fixture that can only be replaced with an LED fixture, not an incandescent bulb. So they've pushed it so much so that it's really inconvenient to have any kind of incandescent bulbs anywhere. So the point is that it was at 45. Well, with this new legislation that I talked about that's coming in 2028, we actually talk about it on our MedCram channel. They're going to raise this to 125 lumens per watt. depending on the bulb that we're talking about, but generally around 125. That's going to completely decimate the production of any bulbs that are LED that give off here and there in the infrared spectrum. You just can't do it. And so that's where we're headed with bulbs and windows right now. This is the reason why I believe that we're essentially creating an environment that we're in 93% of the time that is devoid of infrared light. And as we'll talk about, that's pretty amazing in a bad way, because infrared light is so beneficial. We haven't talked about it yet, but it's the missing link that we haven't talked about.
Well, it's interesting, as you say, 93%. I know the number of people with metabolic dysfunction is right around that same number these days, which is extremely high and sad.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I believe that infrared light is so much more. It's part of that equation when I say that sunlight is so much more than vitamin D. Infrared light resides in a lot of that space.
So given what you just said about the bulbs, it sounds like it's time to go out and stock up while we can.
If you can, yeah.
Since you made it to the end of this clip, I know you're going to love the full episode. Click here to watch. I'll see you over there.
We're spending so much time inside. We have windows that block infrared light because we don't want to increase our cooling costs. We have replaced all of the lights in our homes with LED bulbs. What Bob Fosbury calls this is the scurvy of the 21st century.